These 11 Karens got humbled in the best way possible. When I worked at the Home Depot, a Karen told me she didn't want any black men to install her flooring. I was in charge of arranging her order and told her that we don't select which individuals exactly will install her floor and that she'll get who she gets. She proceeds to have a fit about it, demands white installers, and asks to speak to my manager. I'm so glad she did because my manager's name was Dwayne and he was a real big black dude. Turns out she didn't want to speak to the manager. I really hope that they canceled her order after that because that is just so messed up. It's amazing to me that some people are so blatantly racist in any situation in their life. I deliver appliances for Best Buy. We had a woman call and complain that her fridge was not pre cooled before it was delivered and that she had to wait for it to come down to temp. No one in the office was prepared for that one. Never in my life have I ever heard of someone's refrigerator being pre cooled. It's just one of those things. You get your refrigerator delivery and then you have to wait hours for it to be cool enough to actually put your food into it. It's just a way of life. I don't know who's delivered her refrigerators in the past, but actually, I'd kind of like to know for future reference. When I was working retail, this one woman had a big bag of coupons. Most of them were unusable because either they were expired or they were duplicates. She berated me because the system was rejecting most of the coupons. She called me stupid amongst other names, telling me I just wasn't doing it right. Then, as a typical Karen would, she asked to speak with my manager. My manager came and asked what the problem was. The woman ranted about how incompetent I was because I didn't know how to scan a coupon. My manager looked at the coupons and the coupons were the problem, not me. My manager called out the customer for being disrespectful for me and told the customer to leave the store. I hated working there, but I'm so grateful that I had managers that totally don't go by the customer is always right rule and weren't afraid to stand up for their employees. That was just one of many incidents. As someone who has spent a lot of their life working in retail, I can most definitely relate to this story. And having managers that have your back in situations like this definitely make the job just a little bit better in some ways. Because I've definitely worked places where they 100% live by that rule of the customer is always right. And if you've ever worked in retail before or any situation where you work with customers, you know that the customer is not always right. In medical school, we had a Karen. She was not a very nice person. She was notorious for losing her temper on just about everyone and being an overall bully. One day, she picked me as a target. Apparently, I was sitting in her seat. I asked her to point out to me where it was posted or embroidered on the seat that this was Karen's seat. I refused to budge. Professor entered the lecture theater. Karen protested to the professor. Professor proceeded to give her a verbal beatdown on entitlement and how these types of people make horrible doctors. Karen felt wronged and left. The whole class applauded as she was leaving. She mostly kept to herself afterwards. I felt it was long overdue, justice being served. Yeah, I can definitely agree that having a Karen as a doctor or anywhere in the medical field is definitely a recipe for bad patient care. Honestly, speaking from experience, you don't want to have to deal with a Karen when you're dealing with health issues. And I'm so glad that the professor actually stood up for the storyteller here because clearly that's just a stupid thing for someone to be throwing a fit over. It's just a seat. Blew up at me for ignoring her son, who was trying to hit on me by saying konnichiwa and calling me kawaii. I had never met him before, and I'm not Japanese. She called me a stuck up racist and insinuated that I should be glad he was wordly enough to speak Asian to me. I just responded, sorry, no English. They had previously heard me speaking English with my friend, I'm pretty sure, and walked away. That's just weird, man. And talk about a total mama's boy having mommy stand up for you when you're just being a creep. And then to say something like that and to call him racist is just the biggest piece of irony in this whole story. One time, Karen put her own hair in her half-eaten plate of food and then threw a royal fit demanding her meal be comped and that she speak to the manager. I went into the back of the restaurant, pulled out the orange hair with 3 inches of regrowth, and asked the Mexican guys in the kitchen, "Hey, did any of you bring a wig to work today?" They told me to F off. Went back out, told Karen that nobody on staff has red hair and blonde roots, while staring directly at her disastrous dye job, but the manager said we would be happy to buy dessert for the whole table to make up for this strange phenomenon. The 4 other people at the table were clearly mortified and declined dessert. She ordered cheesecake, and they all sat there and glared at her while she devoured it. Friggin' Karen. Friggin' Karen is right, honestly. I'd never understood why people do things like this. I mean, obviously, it's because they get away with it. But the fact that the manager actually kind of bent a little bit in this situation and offered free dessert is the reason why Karens continue to get away with stuff like this. It's just creating a cycle of madness for anybody else who has to come in contact with this Karen. My grandparents live on a lake, and the first 20 feet from the lake is communal property. I was about 10 years old and feeding the geese corn on the lake across from my grandparents' house, and Karen walked halfway around the lake just to tell me that I wasn't allowed to encourage them to poop on her lawn and that I had to stop feeding them immediately. When I told her that my grandfather said I was allowed to, she marched me up to his house, rang the doorbell, and only deflated when she realized my grandfather was the president of the HOA and pissed at her for grabbing his granddaughter. From that point on, I made it a point to scatter corn on the 20 feet directly in front of her lawn. That is the perfect response to that. And how fitting is it that this person's grandfather was actually the president of the HOA? That is the last person that you want to bring a stupid petty complaint to, at least in a decent HOA that doesn't have a bunch of silly rules. And honestly, whether this girl was feeding the birds or not, they're still going to poop wherever they poop. It is what it is. It's outside. When I worked at a bakery, Karen bought a chocolate cupcake and ate half of it. Karen then asked if she could return her half-eaten cupcake, not because she didn't like it, but because she wanted to exchange it for half of a vanilla cupcake, something less decadent. Like most bakeries, we did not sell cupcakes by the half. She became offended when I asked if she wanted to purchase a vanilla cupcake. I mean, that is the most sensible response, right? We don't sell cupcakes by the half. You want a vanilla cupcake because a chocolate cupcake that you've already eaten half of is too decadent for you. Things cost money, Karen. What exactly did you expect them to do with the other half of the cupcake that you probably bit into? One day, while I was manning the registers with a few other coworkers of mine, I had a massive nosebleed right as I finished a transaction. I grabbed a tissue and quickly excused myself to run to the restroom so I could try to get it to stop bleeding. This meant that I couldn't say goodbye to Karen and give the little spiel about how I was oh so grateful for her shopping with us. After about 10 minutes, I was finally able to get my nose back under control and headed back to the registers. I saw her waiting to the side with a scowl on her face, arms crossed over her chest, the whole 9 yards. She proceeded to scold me for how rude I was for not saying goodbye. After I apologized and explained that I had an unexpected nosebleed, she told me I should have tried holding it in and that the customer comes first. Somehow, I don't think she would have had that viewpoint if you'd gotten blood on her. Just saying. Left her card in the card reader at the McDonald's I was managing as a teenager, rang me to say I needed to drive it out to her, that I ruined her night, ruined her family's night, owed her free food, and that she'll be leaving a formal complaint when I refused all of the above. She showed up 15 minutes later with steam blowing out her ears asking for her card back. Last we ever heard from her. She was 15 minutes away, forgot her card at the store, and threw a huge fit that they had ruined her entire night because of something that she did to herself. But she was only 15 minutes away from the store. You can't tell me that if she's going to stop at McDonald's for dinner, that it's that pressing for her to drive back to the store to get her freaking card. I was a supervisor at Cost Plus World Market. A Karen comes in one night pushing a cart full of obviously used throw pillows and asks to return them. Of course, she has no receipt and instead wants us to just look her up in the system, except she refuses to provide her information for us to try to look her up. She starts yelling at my cashier, and that's when I stepped in to tell her very politely and calmly that she needs a receipt or she needs to provide us with her name and phone number. She starts screeching and screaming about how we're idiots and she'll get us fired, blah, blah, blah. Then she demands an apology from the president of the world. I'm certain she meant the president of World Market, but in her bleached hair fury, she said the president of the world, and I barely held it together as I calmly offered her the corporate feedback number. She wouldn't take it and instead walked out of the store still yelling and without her cart of dirty pillows. She returned about 20 minutes later, quietly apologized, and took her pillows with her. We never heard from her again. Sounds to me like she didn't actually buy the pillows from there, because if she didn't have a receipt and she wanted them to return the items for her, you'd think the most sensible thing to do would be to comply with their policy and procedure on how to return items without a receipt. It's always nice to see Karens being humbled, and I would say in most of these stories they were pretty well humbled. One would like to say that hopefully they learned something from this experience, but my guess is that they're just never going to learn to better their ways, and that they're just going to continue torturing the people around them with their weird self entitlement. Let me know which one of these stories you thought was the most ridiculous, and if you have some Karen stories, you know that I want to hear about them in the comments.